This is 100 Years of Cox. You are listening to a podcast by Frances Thompson. I'm telling the story of 10 siblings from the Machel Cox family through the letters they wrote to each other. They were born in England between 1868 and 1884. 7 of them lived in England and 3 lived abroad in the colonies. These siblings are my family. Sibling number 2, Edmund, is my great-grandfather. Today I'm appreciating the family I have. My mother Jennifer and my auntie Judy were the last 2 Machel Coxes in my branch of the family. Although both of them have now died, saying their names, sharing memories of them with my siblings, and remembering their stories keeps them alive in my heart. But the Machel Cox name continues in other branches of the family. The descendants of Rev Dr John Charles Cox thrive in many different countries across the globe. I laugh at some of the 10 siblings, and I'm often frustrated at Edmund in particular, but I feel immensely privileged to be able to read these letters and share the story of these remarkable siblings. Every week I enjoy reading their escapades, and producing these podcasts has never been a chore. By saying their names and remembering them, I can keep a piece of them alive, even though they are gone. In this episode, we have letters from Bernard, Cuthbert, Arthur and Vera, and today the nightshirt pyjama discussion is making me laugh. Bernard writes the most delightful phrase in his letter. The great question of nightshirt versus pyjamas, which is now nightly before me. Bernard also writes about Rev Dr Cox shouting at carol singers and chasing them out of the garden. Really, an Anglican clergyman who detested carol singers. What a bloke. Cuthbert has had 17 teeth pulled out in total, at the startling age of just 27 years old, and he's waiting for his permanent dentures to be ready. Bernard and Cuthbert give their opinions on the Druce-Portland case, which was enthralling everyone. Arthur has students in quarantine due to scarlet fever, and he writes about working in his darkroom on photographs wearing an old nightshirt, as you do. Vera has to finish her letter abruptly due to the dreadful news that something is missing from the Christmas budget, and Bernard, who is the editor, needs her help to go and look for it. Bernard's letter, Sydenham, December the 2nd, 1907. Dear family, I am very interested in the budget this time, especially in the cover in which it travelled, a piece of brown paper which Vera first sent to Edmund. Since then it has been redirected to Avis, Enid and myself using the same piece of brown paper. I hope it will last all the way round. Avis's illustration, in Arthur's letter, of Dorothy withdrawing from the budget is interesting, but if I could wield the brush as well as Avis, I should depict the scene in a very different manner. Why is Cuthbert so specially overcome? And why are Vera and I jeering at Dorothy? Enid seems the only person in the illustration who takes it philosophically. I think it is very sad that Dorothy should withdraw altogether. Avis really should have scattered a few more tears about. The great question of nightshirt versus pyjamas is now nightly before me. The nightshirts I have worn for years upon years are at last giving in, and I shall have to make up my mind soon as to whether I shall buy more nighties or try pyjamas. At present, the family is divided thus. Nightshirts, Father, Edmund, Flannelette, Arthur, Bernard and Cyril. Pyjamas, Neville, Wilfrid, Aldwyn and Cuthbert. I am thinking of possibly going over to the pyjama side, which will put them in a majority, but I'm willing to stay on the Nightshirt side for a consideration. Vera has told you all about her visit with me to Devonport. I had been there once before, but not in term time, and the house was being spring cleaned. Consequently, the drawing room was new to me. I think it is a delightful room, though if I lived there it would take me a long time to find out which windows to have open according to the prevailing winds. There are windows in every direction, so it is quite an amusing occupation. Christopher hadn't altered as much as I expected. I don't think he is at all ugly, as Dorothy makes out in her letters. He has a very pleasant smile and seems an attractive little boy. I hope these candid remarks will not embarrass his parents. Vera's description of the rugger match was very good. I much enjoyed it, and I also enjoyed the theatre in the evening. Father is very keen on the reliquary just now, and has just discovered that he has a great deal too much stuff for the January number. His sub-editor has been aware of this for some time, but she cannot control him. Edmund, I have sent you some quotations. It is very easy to find disagreeable ones, and very difficult to find nice ones. Can anyone explain why this is? You will have to excuse a scrappy letter this time, as the Xmas number is occupying all my spare time. I asked Father to contribute something, and the consequences were alarming. He dictated 20 pages of manuscript straight off the reel, which took most of yesterday afternoon and evening. My scratched out line in my last letter was like all the others. I didn't know it would excite so much curiosity. Here is another. No prizes for deciphering it. The illustration of Edmund playing golf, I suppose, is, I fancy, by a new artist. Bertram of the Royal Academy, suggests Arthur in the margin. Avis, what a lot of suppressed colds you have. Don't they ever come out? Enid, I feel as if I know Llandudno quite well. I remember Aldwyn going there with Mary West. It was, I think, when we were living at Lichfield, when Father was studying theology. I remember his accounts of it perfectly well. Great Ormshead, Little Ormshead, and I think Conway Castle. The Druce-Portland case is astounding. I agree with you that Caldwell and Miss Robinson are really first-class liars. I am beginning to believe now that the coffin contains the body of a genuine T.C. Druce, and the family refuse to have it opened because they know it is all right. I remember Mrs. Isles, you, Wilfred and me having an argument about opening the grave about 9 years ago, in Alexandra Road, I think. I am afraid my remarks about Browning were not clearly expressed. They certainly do read as if I considered prose and twaddle as synonymous terms. Your quotation about him is interesting. I have not read Prospice, nor One Word More, but I certainly will do so now. I also want to know what Anglis Redenda refers to. Neville's letter is astonishing. I can't say how long it took me to read, as I devoured the instalments separately when they first arrived. It will be very interesting to refer to if any of us travel over the same ground in Europe. As for books, I have not read so many lately as usual. Queen Victoria's Letters. I have only read 2 volumes at present. The letters are well selected, I think, to show how her character developed. I had no idea that she exercised such a wide supervision over her ministers. What an extraordinary grasp of affairs she had for a young girl. It should certainly be read and not skipped, as some of the letters, taken separately, would only seem petty and trivial. I have a much deeper respect for her now than I had before. My angel, that bit does rather put you off now and then. The Secret Agent by Conrad. This book is a story of a secret agent of the Russian government in London. A tragedy. Page after page of pitiless probing of the different characters, thoughts and feelings. Some day I suppose he will write a masterpiece, but it is a long time in coming. and 2 anecdotes to end up with. Father is now enjoying his usual winter pastime of chasing away the waits, who actually began carolling here on November the 19th. The other evening at dinner, little Vera put up her dainty forefinger and said, "Hark, I hear carol singers." Father immediately jumped up in a great hurry, flew out of the dining room and flung open the front door. We poor things left in the dining room tremblingly listened for the explosion of wrath that we had grown so accustomed to hearing on these occasions. Instead of this, however, there came a Homeric burst of laughter. When Father opened the door and shouted, 2 figures ran off down the path, while a third stood his ground on the step and held out a paper of some sort. Father said, "It's nowhere near Christmas. Go away at once. I don't want your paper." With which he knocked the paper out of the man's hand and sent it flying down the steps. The man meekly remarked, "I'm the postman, sir. It's only a letter." The 2 boys who had been singing stood chuckling at the gate. My second anecdote relates to Miss Foster, whom some of you know. She lives on West Hill and is accustomed to set her clock by me when I go to the station in the morning. At least, so she says. The other morning I went for a later train, and I endeavoured to walk past the Fosters without being seen. However, the window was flung up, and a voice called out, "Mr. Cox!" I looked up, whereupon Miss Foster called out, "What is the time? Are you not a quarter of an hour late?" Yours indeed, Bernard. P.S. I see I have several times made use of the exclamation mark. I should be much obliged if Arthur would kindly point out which he thinks unnecessary. This is not for the sake of argument, but I seriously want to know. Notes on Bernard's letter. Joseph Conrad's book, Heart of Darkness, was written in 1899, and at the end of the 20th century it is on the list for the top 100 English novels. The Secret Agent was written by Conrad in 1907, after The Heart of Darkness. Bernard is unimpressed with both The Secret Agent and the author, saying perhaps one day Joseph Conrad will write a masterpiece. I wonder if Bernard had never read Heart of Darkness, or did it become popular in later years, perhaps after it was made into a film. Bernard says he has not read many books. He then gives a detailed review of 10 books. He obviously considered that reading 10 books in 6 weeks was not much. Their discussion about nightshirts versus pyjamas really tickles me, and it gets more entertaining when Avis soon joins in with a female point of view. I wonder what we would debate today in a similar way. Possibly it could be our personal preference for Apple or for Android. The comparison of mobile phones isn't really the equivalent of comparing nightshirts to pyjamas, but I can't think of a better comparison just now. Cuthbert's letter. Number 2, Chapel Street, Berkhamsted, December the 9th, 1907. Dear Budget, rather unfortunately, the budget has come at the very busiest times of term, and I expect Arthur will say the same. The most momentous bit of news I have to give, though of course you will all know long before this comes, is that my salary has been raised £30 a year, with promise of more if we win our lawsuit next month. It is very pleasing, and has made a pleasant end to a rather heavy term. Talking of lawsuits brings me to the Richmond case. The Assistant Masters Association brought the case, one of arbitrary dismissal, up to the Court of Appeal. In the judgment there given, we find we are the servants of nobody, that our services are being given philanthropically with only the hope of being paid, that we are liable to dismissal at a second notice with no cause assigned, though on the other hand we could go off at any moment without giving any notice, and that any written agreement given by the headmaster is not worth the paper it is written on. The judges also said, though of course the print was not before them, that in their opinion the headmaster was also liable to instant dismissal. A deputation has been to McKenna, and all they got was that they had his sincerest sympathy and he would endeavour to give the matter consideration. But he refused to introduce any bill to put things right. Things can't go on like this long, or we shall be having a strike of schoolmasters. Truly, it can be called the noblest and the meanest of professions. Dear Avis, I think it's quite time your cold was suppressed. I think your illustration of the pathetic incident of Dorothy's withdrawal is a masterpiece, and it is a very clever and correct interpretation of our characters. Bernard, there are several strong men here now on the sick list as a result of your story of Father and the Waits. I was late for school in my efforts to recover from it. If true, it is the best story I've heard. Edmund, I'm afraid if I was to write a book with 5 or 6 leading incidents of the year here, you would doubt my veracity still more. I am sure you will all be glad to hear that I have finished with my dentist, as far as having teeth out is concerned. I have lost 17, but have got a small temporary plate to hide the gap in my front teeth. I am waiting till after Christmas for my permanent set. I have got a theory about the Druce case. I believe that Caldwell and Miss Robinson are in the pay of Lord Howard de Walden, or his agent, that they have been bribed to offer their ridiculous evidence to the other side in order to make Druce's case appear so feeble. I don't understand why Herbert Druce refuses to have the coffin opened if the body is really there. And I think it only once more proves that the law is an ass if it can't compel the opening of the coffin. Come, come, exclaims Arthur in the margin, along with an exclamation mark. It will interest some of you, Aldwyn in particular, to know that K.N. Bell, an old Berkhamsted boy, was elected an All Souls Fellow this term. For those of you who don't know, this is about the highest distinction a man can win after taking his degree. He was an athlete as well, as he beat Aldwyn's record in the mile. He ran once or twice for the varsity, and he rode bow in the Balliol 8. Have any of you won a limerick yet? I have not even tried. By the way, I can honestly say I never even tried to read Bernard's scratched out line. Mr. Cole, who is a science master and a reverend, won £13 the other day. But as he had, being ashamed, sent it in his wife's name, he handed over the winnings to her. She spent the £13 on a necklace for herself and the odd shilling on a fountain pen for him. Here's a little competition for you. I object to one of the commas on the front page of sheet 2 of Bernard's letter. Which comma is it? Rather an awkward thing occurred here this term. I had gone out of my way with my form in a discussion about sanctuaries, to pour scorn on ignorant parsons and their picturesque sermons on this topic. One Sunday afterwards, Dr. Fry was unable to preach, and another master had to take his place. As luck would have it, he hit on the subject of the cities of refuge, and then continued on to sanctuaries in England, and he made every single mistake and misstatement that I had told my form about. If either Arthur or Enid is thinking of sending any of their hopefuls to study at McGill University in Canada, I am the man to apply to. I am the representative of that university in England. In other words, I am Dr. Fry's deputy, and my room is overflowing with literature on this subject, and I am supposed to be able to answer questions on the subject if people write. So far, it has meant nothing. Some of you may be interested to hear what our small literary society has been reading this term. We consist of 3 masters and 4 prefects, Scott, Green and I being the masters. This term we have read The Rivals, Romeo and Juliet, and Swinburne's Atalanta in Calydon. A rather varied selection. Yours, Cuthbert. Notes on Cuthbert's letter. The Assistant Masters Association was an early trade union for schoolmasters. I believe this was before women taught in public schools in England. There were certainly only male teachers at Berkhamsted in 1907. Cuthbert appears to be saying that he and his fellow masters don't have a contract or any real job description, and that teaching had not yet been regulated by law. It sounds like there was a court case going on to provide some sort of legal framework for teachers and schools, and that the result would mean a pay rise for the teachers. Cuthbert has a theory about the Druce-Portland case, and it actually includes 3 exclamation marks, which shows that this story aroused some passionate opinions. Arthur disagrees, and he adds a comment in the margin, "Come, come," including an exclamation mark, which is most uncharacteristic for Arthur. Cuthbert also writes, "The law is an hass." Maybe it would have been too impolite for Cuthbert to write, "The law is an ass," which is possibly what he meant. Cuthbert doesn't like limericks. He has said this before, and he finds it quite remarkable that a fellow master, who was also a clergyman, which seems to make it worse, in Cuthbert's opinion, has won a competition with a limerick. The master was embarrassed at entering a competition, so he sent in his answer using his wife's name and won the prize of £13, which was a huge amount of money in 1907. And the wife then spent almost the whole lot on jewellery for herself. What a great story. You may not have heard of the word waits, which is spelt W-A-I-T-S. It is an archaic word, and it's not really used anymore, and it means a band of musicians who go around the streets, especially at Christmas, singing and playing carols. I believe Dr. Cox is describing street boys. They were certainly poor. I'm not sure if Dr. Cox didn't like carol singers at all, or if he just didn't like being bothered at home during dinner, or whether he was most cross that they were singing Christmas carols in November. Whichever reason it was, Dr. Cox was very angry, and Cuthbert and the other masters at Berkhamsted found the story very funny. Cuthbert wrote, "Bernard, there are several strong men now on the sick list as a result of your story of father and the Waits. I was late for school in my efforts to recover from it." The siblings used the budget as a way of entertaining each other, as well as passing on the family news. And online maps means you can have a look at the exact house where the incident occurred, even if you live in a different country. The Cox family were living at number 13 Longton Avenue in Sydenham, South London, which was where the local street boys were tormenting poor Dr. Cox by singing Christmas carols in November. Arthur's letter. Garfield House, Devonport, 13th of December 1907. Dear Budget, were I to rewrite the story of Tantalus, I would picture him receiving a budget teeming with good things which he never had the leisure to digest. Fortunately, I had already read about half its contents surreptitiously before it was my turn. If I pass a few remarks now, I fear they will be of a very scrappy nature, and I may have to break off abruptly. Things keep turning up at every corner, demanding attention. First, as to Bernard's punctuation. I imagine that Cuthbert is taking exception to the sentence beginning, "I remember Mrs. Isles," which is ambiguous, however you punctuate it. But very probably the ingenious Cuthbert is only propounding another Lewis Carroll conundrum. The notes of exclamation you have inserted are, after all, after my own heart. Incidentally, I would point out that the Waits story loses nothing by their omission. I grieve to see that, in spite of Cuthbert's appreciation of it. His awe for Bertram scarce repressed the unbeliever's sneering jest. I certainly hope it is true, but if it is not, that is not Bertram's fault. I am looking eagerly forward to my Christmas budget. The table of contents promises very well. May I here wish you one and all the compliments of the season, prospectively or retrospectively, as the case may be. Dorothy and I and the boy are going to spend it in our usual unconventional manner at the seaside. We are taking rooms at a little place called Downderry, about 12 miles off, in Cornwall. Our acting is going ahead in spite of the usual crop of difficulties. 2 of our principal actors have gone into quarantine because a sister has scarlet fever, and several others are on the sick list. Avis and Dorothy, however, are both towers of strength. The Druce case is certainly very extraordinary, and I almost incline to Cuthbert's theory. Atherley Jones appears to be marvellously simple-minded, and I think he must have been squared too. Avery has no difficulty whatever in knocking the bottom out of the prosecution, but he will have to do the same by that coffin before I, and the British public, will be satisfied. I congratulate you, Cuthbert, on your acquisition of wealth. Edmund, take note. Avis's picture of the passing of Dorothy is delightful. Edmund and Cuthbert are especially characteristic. I see that Vera is a head and shoulders above little Burr. Anglis Redenda, as Edmund at any rate can tell you, is a book of Latin unseen to torment schoolboys, and it was compiled by Jerram's uncle. I am getting a little of my own back now, after many days. I hope Edmund won't be shy about contributing sketches. The remark that bothered you should read, "Does anyone know who R is?" Avis had made several impertinent references to this individual, and I was merely curious about his identity. I have now got to a second sheet of notepaper, thanks to my margin. I have just received 3 more books to review for the Athenaeum after a month's holiday. 2 of them are very attractive. I think I shall have earned about £20 this year by writing reviews. Somehow this paper is not at all pleasant to write on. It seems so greasy, and I have a continual feeling of slipping back 1 or 2 words at every full stop, and my pen frequently fails to leave a spoor at all. I suppose Edmund is by this time a proficient diabolist. No, had enough of it, adds Edmund. The game took very acutely here for a week or 2, but is practically dead already. The other day, Moore went for a long exploring ride on Dartmoor, and when he was some miles from any habitation, he came across a lonely figure, which on closer inspection proved to be a youth with a bad attack of the complaint. He had bicycled out to practice in solitude, and stopped on finding himself observed. But the last Moore saw of him was an embodiment of perpetual motion against the skyline behind him. Probably he is there still. As some of you know, our playground is somewhat confined, and it has actually happened that when a boy has been tossing up for first innings at cricket, the coin has been accidentally tossed over the wall. As to books, Queen Victoria's Letters interested me greatly. I have read the 1st and 3rd volumes only as yet, when I felt I had had enough for a time. She was a wonderful woman. The only thing she lacked was a sense of humour. December 15th. I won't expend any further energies on this letter, as the Christmas budget will be looming large very shortly. I am glad to say that since I wrote about the Druce case 2 days ago, I have prevailed on Atherley Jones to chuck Caldwell overboard. If there is anything in the whole story, the longer the defence can keep their end up, the better their chance grows, as all available witnesses will soon be dying off. The photos asked for will, I hope, be forthcoming next term. Photography has been at a standstill of late. Neville's letter is really like my Parnell's reference book and may be regarded as a special supplement to the present number. I was in great distress with my nightshirts last night, and I changed twice, my last state being not much better than my first. One of the condemned nightshirts I have finally rejected for sleeping purposes, and I have been wearing it to tone photographs in it this afternoon. I have not entered the arena on behalf of Browning, though I am interested as a spectator. I think he is pretty capable of taking care of himself in the end. I regret that I have not contributed to the quotations, but, like Burr, could only land on uncomplimentary ones, and had no book to save me the labour. Avis and I are to be the guests of the prelate tonight. I end on a sad note, I fear. Yours, certainly, Arthur. This empty space to let for advertisements. Charge 6d per 24 words. Note on Arthur's letter. No one filled in the empty last page of Arthur's letter. Avis was, no doubt, too busy with Christmas preparations to use the space for a sketch. Cuthbert thinks Bernard has put a comma where one shouldn't be, and Arthur is musing about which comma Cuthbert is talking about. Arthur is also keen to point out where an exclamation mark is not needed. He had very strong opinions on exclamation marks and their appropriate use. I think he is approving of Bernard not using any exclamation marks when retelling the story of Dr. Cox and the carol singers. I think Arthur is actually saying to Bernard, "Well done, I approve of your punctuation." Imagine if we decided to correct the spelling and punctuation in emails we receive from friends and family today. I can only imagine the arguments that would develop. Arthur has already seen the contents page for the upcoming Christmas budget. He approves, and he is looking forward to reading it. Arthur is very busy. It is the end of term. He has boys in quarantine due to scarlet fever, and he's also trying to put on the school play. There was a craze for the game of Diabolo in 1907, and most of the siblings have already had a go at playing the game. Edmund declares that he has had a go, but has now had enough. Enid says that the locals in Llandudno call it Diabello and Satan at play. Enid's teenage son Owen has announced he does not want to receive Diablo for Christmas, although Enid confesses that it is too late, as an aunt has already bought it for Owen. Mr. Moore is the Irishman who teaches at Garfield House School, and he will go on to marry Avis in a few years' time. He has been out cycling, and he came across a youth with a bad attack of the complaint, practicing Diabolo in secret on the middle of Dartmoor. If you look online, you can find many images of Edwardian people in smart clothes playing Diabolo. I will put a couple of the images on Twitter. Poor Arthur says he is in distress over his nightshirts, and he cannot get comfortable at night. I find it very entertaining, imagining him wearing an old nightshirt, developing photographs in his darkroom at Garfield House. Arthur sounds like he was such a character. Vera's letter, Sydenham, December 22nd, 1907. Dear family, this is going to be a short and uninteresting letter because there are so many things to do. Christmas carols, Christmas presents, etc., that my thoughts refuse to be collected for an ordinary budget letter. Then it is enough to put anyone off to have to write at a table already laid for supper when it is only 3:30 in the afternoon. This I've had to do as I find I cannot write in the drawing room, the combined attraction of Avis and Cuthbert being too much for me. Although Avis arrived yesterday, I have not seen much of her yet, as she went to bed at 8:15 yesterday and was only just down in time for lunch today. She is rather fagged after a big end-of-term rush. Her brain appears to be rather used up too, as the only thing on which she seems able to concentrate her thoughts appears to be her hockey stick, and I've had a long account of how Dorothy rendered first aid to it. Father's book, Memorials of Derbyshire, seems to be selling well, a good thing, as he is only paid by royalty. Bernard has just interrupted my flow of ideas by the dreadful news that something is missing of the Christmas budget, and half an hour's search has produced no result. However, I expect it will turn up. I have no news, as everything seems to have gone on as usual. Hockey continues despite the wet weather, and our club record has not yet been spoilt. We have played 9 matches and won them all, but Kent is not doing well. We have won 2 and we lost 2, but were only beaten by the odd goal in each case. We played a county match down at Wrotham the other day. It is rather out of the way, but there are a good many Kent clubs down there who have never seen any good hockey. They did us awfully well, gave us a magnificent cold lunch and a very good tea afterwards. About 150 people turned up to watch. The ground was quite surrounded by motor cars, as that is practically the only way of getting there. They thought the hockey was wonderful, and our hostess thought that Molly Gibson's, some of you have seen her running was like a Greek goddess. I have got Avis a hockey match for tomorrow. I hope she will behave nicely. Burr has routed us out again to look for the missing portion of the Xmas budget, so I must stop as I want to post this. With many apologies for this scrap, which is not really a letter. Yours affectionately, Vera. Notes on Vera's letter. Vera is writing her letter just before Christmas at 13 Longton Avenue in Sydenham. She is writing in the dining room, where the table is already laid for supper, because Avis and Cuthbert are in the drawing room and are too much of a distraction. Father will be upstairs in his study, working on his next book. He was really quite a prolific author, but it's interesting that Vera indicates that he doesn't earn a lot from his books. Maybe that's why he wrote so many. On Christmas Day in 1907, the siblings were in various different places. Arthur, Dorothy, and their son Christopher are being unconventional and spending Christmas at the seaside, at Downderry in Cornwall. Edmund is in Derbyshire at his parish in Claycross, as well as also spending time in January at Long Eaton with May, his fiancée. Enid and Cyril and family are in Liverpool. Cuthbert, Bernard, Avis and Vera are in Sydenham with their parents. Aldwyn is in Malawi, Neville is in South Africa, and Wilfred is in British Columbia in Canada. Meanwhile, Bernard is in a panic about a portion of the Christmas budget which is missing. Vera's help is required to find it, so she finishes her letter and apologises that it is so short. Vera posts the budget off to Derbyshire to Edmund, where, yes, you've guessed it, Edmund sits on it for 2 weeks until January. Another 6-penny fine for Edmund. In the next episode of 100 Years of Cox, I will start reading the 1907 Christmas budget. There are limericks about all the 10 siblings, which give an interesting insight into aspects of their characters. There are alphabet poems about the siblings, fascinating cookery pages, a ladies' page, a chess competition, a literary competition, and the account of father chasing the carol singers away, which makes them all laugh so much. All the items are written by the 7 home budget members, as Bernard only had the idea in November, which didn't give enough time for the foreign brothers to add any contributions. And there are also items written by both mother and father. The Christmas budget was designed as family entertainment, and it was intended to be read aloud in the drawing room on Christmas Day after tea and presents. There is no TV to watch, remember. Everyone ate a huge lunch of turkey and plum pudding. The men then went for a walk, whilst the ladies fell asleep in the drawing room, and then it was tea, presents, and the Christmas budget. There are several Christmas budgets in the following few years, and the pattern of Christmas Day remains the same for the Machel Cox family in Sydenham. After Christmas, the special edition of the budget is then posted to Derbyshire, then to Liverpool and then to Plymouth, before being posted abroad to Malawi, South Africa and Canada. Several of the siblings say they enjoy reading it so much that they want to keep it and read it again, and are very sad that they have to post it on. The 1907 Christmas budget then returns to England and resides in the bottom of a wardrobe, except when it is taken out and reread in later years as the siblings relive their youth. Incredibly, several of the Christmas budgets survived until the 1980s, when Sir Christopher Machel Cox and his brother David gifted all the documents to the Bodleian Library, where I discovered them upon visiting Oxford in 2018. Front covers are missing, the binding has fallen apart, but all the pages are there. My Auntie Judy knew of the ordinary budget letters, and she'd read a few of them, but she had no idea there were special Christmas editions full of poems and stories. In the last year of her life, I read some to her over the phone, and I emailed her some more to read, and she laughed and laughed and told me of the Machel Cox peculiar and wacky sense of humour possessed by many of the siblings. So next week there will be poems and stories, which I hope will give you some amusement, and maybe you will imagine 4 siblings taking it in turn to read the Christmas budget aloud on Christmas Day 1907 in Sydenham. 100 Years of Cox, the Machel Cox budget letters, and all content is subject to copyright and belongs to both myself and the Bodleian Library in Oxford. Machel Cox Letters is on Twitter, where I share all sorts of things. If you have any questions, please write to me, machelcoxletters@gmail.com. You have been listening to 100 Years of Cox. Thank you for listening.